Hello and welcome to the fourth and final part of getting all these 30 core models ready for the gaming table. Now, in part 3 we ended with just basically doing some wear on the transfers, the decals that we'd fitted. So the next and final stage will be to go on to all the weathering process and get these finished and ready for the table. Having done the decal wear, we can do the chipping in a similar way using a sponge. Now the thing is, on a lot of the Shermans you don't see very much of the chipping. It just tends to be more that it's affected the paintwork and you get little flecks of a lighter green on it with wear, but still there's going to be the odd bit of chipping on these vehicles, so you've just got to be very sparing with this. You dip it in the black paint and then you try and get off nearly everything. You don't want anything too over the top. Alright, let's start with this one. Let's do a little bit along the bottom here near the wheel arch. The bottom. A little bit on the mud guard. You can take your time with this. There's no rush, but it's best, to keep it light. You don't want to overdo this. You can see a little bit on the wheel arch at the beginning and on the edge of the mudguard. But you just need to keep it fairly light, otherwise it can soon, look just too much. And concentrate on the areas that would receive chipping, like on this tow bar. That would almost certainly be chipped. So the actual tow hook, I've gone in on that one, look, took that down to metal. Odd bits on the door. Especially along the bottom of it. Right. Move that along. If I bring a tank in, these tend to be on the extreme edges and corners, like up this bit, perhaps a little bit on the top corner edge, but nothing too much. Just keep it light. You can see that. Just keeping it very, very light on this. You see that? It's very hard to make out on the camera, but But definitely on this, less is more. You know, you really don't want to overdo it. If you do find that you've gone a bit heavy on one, I mean, you should be able to easily wipe it off anyway. But if you're still struggling, if it's in, say, an area like this, you can hide it with mud anyway, because we've got that to do yet. Right, so you get the idea. Like I say, nothing too much. Concentrate on the eyewear areas like hatches, bottoms of doors, where it's coming into contact with the road, where it might have brushed past something. You know, for instance, it's unlikely you're going to get where smack bang in the top of something. It's going to be around something that's moved, where an hatch has dropped open, or where you've dragged something through an opening and it's caught. So you just got to use your imagination. Think about it, you know, like you would with your own car. You know, where does it get its rust spot? Where does it get its damage? It's not going to be very different. You're going to be clambering up on a tank, so you're going to be catching it. So think about where the soldiers have climbed up it, and that gives you your clue. And there's plenty of examples out there on the net that you can look at if you want, you know, more of a suggestion of, you know, where best to apply it. But to be honest, you know, you soon get the feel of it when you try and put yourself in that frame of mind. Right, I'll do this for the rest of them now, and then I'll bring you back for the next stage. Right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of a pin wash, and that's like basically following round hatches and putting a dark wash in all those recesses, but it's to keep it thin. You don't want it spurging out onto the rest of the surface. You literally just want to pick out the details, or the nuts and rivets, things like that. So it can be a bit time consuming, but it's definitely worth the effect, especially on some of the wheel rims and things like that, where it can just dip into around the nuts on the wheel and things, you know, that just lifts it out a bit. So I've tipped a little bit of the dark tone out. I'll start with this one. Now, I don't know whether you can see it, but if you look at the wheels, you see how the nuts, I mean, they're fine, but they're green. They look a little bit flat. So we'll do a tiny bit on the end of your brush. If you take a look at that now, you see that it's picked out the nuts and the rims a bit more. I'm just difficult to see, you know, just how clear you're seeing this, but I think that gives it a better look. You can see it. And it just lifts that wheel up. It doesn't look so flat, you know, and just army green anymore. It's got a little bit of shadow and depth to it. And then the other bits that you need to follow, like I say, is things like the door trim, where the door opening. You see that? How it's picked it out, as opposed to the other side. That's the flat. Now you can see it a bit more. So it's just going round little recesses and little marks on the actual vehicle, just to give it that lifting up, so you can actually see some of the subtleties of the mould. It also acts like you would get grime that builds up in the recesses. Go with the radiator with this as well. All them pin dots filled in. You can see that. It's a subtle thing, but it really brings the model to life. And it is worth taking that bit of extra time on it. I mean, you wouldn't normally probably be making up as many models in one go as I am here, really, but this was just for the point of the videos, really. You know, so if you're doing one model at a time, you can really take your time on this. Around the oil tank as well would be a good area to. It's a little panel door that's worth going round. And if you have a look at the fuel thing underneath, that's pulled the detail out of that a bit more. Once it actually dries as well, it goes even more subtle, and it really brings it to life. The good place is underneath it. I mean, a lot of people don't really bother too much with the underside. I tend to do a little bit, just because I feel like I'm completing it then. Oh, and up under the mudguard there, that looks like it could do with it. Bottom of the fuel tank. I'll be adding a bit of rust underneath it as well. Like I say, you don't need to, but it's just something I like to do. like it to look all prepared on the top, and then, you know, when you're picking it up, it looks pristine, newly painted underneath. Looks good on the axle as well. Just gives it a bit of a grimed look. I mean, we're going to be adding mud and stuff, so anyway, you get the idea. That's pin washing, really. You know, picking out all the small details, all the lines, doors, panels, you know, around the edges, wherever grime would actually settle and stick in place. So what I'm going to do, as normal, is I'll go through the rest of these doing the same thing now. I won't bring you along on that, and come back for the next stage. I brought you back for this one because I thought this was a particularly useful one to see how it's lifted all these door frames and the rivets. I'll show you. Just bring them rivets to life on the edge there. I know I'm going over it a bit heavy here, but I'll let it pull around the things, around the actual rivets, and damp it off. And you can see it, and you can see all these panels more clearly. And the wheels, you know, you can pick out all the individual nuts now. I mean, look at that plain wheel. Okay, that one wouldn't normally get very grimy, but just for the sake of showing you, if I go around that, you see how much more alive that's come. And it's particularly good on these little vents here and on the radiator. So that's that one done. But what I thought I'd do is I'd just, I don't know, which one should we use? We'll use this one. Thought I'd bring you back for the tank as well. You see these bits where they look just too green. And if you just dab down over that, look at the difference that it makes into the recess of the wheels. You see that? You know, you can see them two are done and that one's not. You see that quite clearly. And it just lifts it and gives it that more motion. You can see the motion in the wheels and that now. And obviously what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around all the panels and the vents and everything on this like I have with the other vehicles. Alright, okay then, I'll bring you back in a bit. One particular good bit on a tank that's worth looking at is, you see the hatch, the main hatch? Just let it pull into where it's joining. Yeah, so if you just let it pull into the recesses around the hatch, you can see how it brings it to life, and you can literally see that it opens now. Without that, it looks a bit flat. And another really good bit on tanks is these vents. I mean, look, you can see that just looks plain green. Alright, let's just put a bit onto that. Let it get into the grill. I've got to remember that this is an engine, so is that how the grill would look? I doubt it. These edges while I'm here as well. Oh, little hatch. There you go. Just looks, it picks up the grime then. And then the other thing that I looked at was the little hatch on the side of the turret just here, look. It actually looks like it could open now. Alright, I'll press on and I'll bring you back for the next stage. I'll just bring you back again just to show you what a difference it's made on this this tank. You see that I've gone around all the hatches and the details on the turret, the radiator, particularly on the wheels. And the thing that's pleasing about it is this is not, I mean it's good, but it's not a particularly detailed as much as some of the other tanks, because this is a resin cast. But you can see now, by using this pin wash, how it's brought that to life and opened it up and made it look individual parts. I mean, the hatch was pretty nondescript before. It's lifted it right up. The wheels, you can see the individual bits. It's made it look like they are individual components. So, I mean, it's made a vast difference to this one. I mean, the others lend themselves to it really well because they are separate parts that you've built. But on a resin where it's just one mould, it's really done the trick on this. Because I don't have many resin vehicles apart from where there's no choice. I think this is the only resin tank I've got. And it don't look too bad now, considering. You know, obviously the stowage that we've put on it brought it to life a bit as well, but I'm really pleased with the what the pin wash has done for it. It's made it look less like a mould now. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring you back and share that with you in case you've got any resin vehicles. You know, it really can lift it up and bring the details out a lot more. Right, I promise I won't bring you back while I'm doing this stage again. I just couldn't resist sharing that with you. Right, so I've done all the pin washing now. And like the final stage I'm going to be doing now is adding some of the mud effects. And I thought what I'd do is I'd do a couple of different types. So I'm going to start first of all with a bit of dried on mud. You know, the really thin stuff. You know, nothing cloggy or, you know, thick mud or anything like that at the moment. And for that technique, I tend to use Army Painter Leather Brown. But, I mean, like, you know, whatever paints you use, I mean, there's probably an earth brown, you know, anything like that is quite suitable, really. I'm hoping I've got a little bit left in this one. Yeah, a little bit coming out. Right, now the secret of this one is dry brushing. My dry brush has seen better days really, but I'm going to have to go with it for now. Get a reasonable coating on the brush first of all, just to get it into it, and then you're focusing on brushing it off, because we don't want to be overdoing it. Right, I'll do this one first. I'm just doing fast, smooth strokes, all going in one direction, just to add that dried mud effect and the dust that it's kicked up. Bit on the wheels as well. I'll bring that a bit close for you to have a look at. Try and put a bit of light on it. It's quite subtle, nothing too major. You can just see it, and it's all the places where it would flick up really. Not too high up the side of the vehicle. But if I show you the other side, that's before. And then after. You can see it on the wheels as well. Right, I'll do the other side. Again, I'm going to put some underneath as well. I won't quite be so sparing with this, because obviously that's where most of it's going to gather. I've said before, there's no real need to do underneath, but I just find it satisfying to do it all, so. Got to be a little bit more gentle with the brushing on this bit, because obviously we're talking fragile parts here, but. Right, if I bring that closer in. Tiny bit more on that wheel there, on the hub. There you go. On the back. And underneath. Right. So that's what I'm going to be doing on all these vehicles now. I'm just going to give them that light bit of leather brown dry brushing. And when I've done that, I'll bring you back and show you another different mud technique. Initially you can use this same technique for the tanks. As I said before, keep it in one direction. I need to take it too high up. Obviously on the front here. Yeah, you can see that. Nothing too dramatic. It's not been going across a ploughed field. Obviously I'm going to be going in here as well. As you can tell, that's the other side where I've not touched it. And then that's the side with it. So I'll carry on getting this done and I'll bring the other tanks up and then we'll switch to the other technique. Right, with that done, the next technique that I use, I'm not going to be doing very much on these because I'm kind of happy with where they are. But obviously if I was going for a lot more muddy terrain, there'd be evidence of more gritty mud. So I tend to use this weathering powder by Humbrol. I just get a little bit out. Right, now what I'm going to do, I could wash this, get this all the way down to a very thin wash, but I don't want that. I don't want clogging mud. I just want that gritty mud that's got into all the crevices and things. So I need to keep it so it's not too thin. So start out with a little dab of this decal fix. And draw the powder into it. Just put the lid on that so then it comes in, knock it over. I'm just going to add a little bit more powder. I want it a little bit more gritty than that. Whether you can see that. Turn the light on it a bit. It's slightly gritty still. And what I do on this, take this one, is I just put a little bit in the wheel. And more particularly on tracks. Get it deep down where it's caked in a bit more. At the back as well. The inside. Don't need to be too much. You see the difference? It sits in the bottom of the wheels. Now obviously you can experiment with this, because obviously if you want it even thicker, you just add less of the decal fix. I'm going to add a little bit more powder to this and see if I can show you a bit more of the crunchy stuff. You see that? It's just like wet powder now. I'll drag this one over. And I'll put a bit of this into the wheels and in the bottom of the track. You see that effect? A bit of the wetter stuff in. That's that one. And that just gets that slightly fresher tacky mud into it rather than the dried leather effect that I went for before. Let's do it on one of the tanks. Get it deep down into the wheels and onto the track. There you go. You can see it a bit more on there. See that? Right, so I'm going to go around and do that on all of these, and then there's just a couple of other bits of mud technique that you can use, but I'll get these bits done first. Right, the next one is thick mud. Now I really don't want to put a lot on my tanks on these. It's not the style that I'm looking for, but I can demonstrate it on this Morris quad, because obviously that's going to be a heavier vehicle, so it's going to have picked up some from the past as it's gone across the field or dropped off a artillery piece. So I will put a bit on my tanks, but not very much, so I'll just show it you on this. And this is like pre-mixed Vallejo thick mud. I'm mainly going to concentrate underneath in the wheel arches here on this. A little bit in the bottom of the wheel. Just dabbing it on really. Because you want the grit to stand up. You know, so you're not brushing it as such, you're just dabbing it into place. You can see that a bit clearer. And in the wheel arches, you see the bits of grit. That's where it's picked up the thicker mud and flicked it underneath. I mean, you can really go to town with this stuff if you go tank ploughing through the mud and everything, but in this case, I just want it to be more subtle. You can see how it stands proud of the surface. It really does look like clinging mud. It is good stuff, this. It's, you know, especially if you really go into town with it. But even like this, you know, just a subtle finish on the undercarriage. You wouldn't take it up the sides so much, because obviously that's where it's going to be washed off by the rain and come down and dry out and fall off. So it tends to be, you know, in all the crevices underneath more, and bits of the wheel arch. You might get a bit where it's driven down into mud and gathered up a bit in the wheel. Like that. Now, on that wheel, you can see it, the back wheel. Do the other side to match it. So that's another mud technique. I'm going to have a quick look through my vehicles, see if there's any others I want to add a little bit of this to. And then I'll bring you back for one final one, which is splash mud. So that's more like, you know, where you've ran through a muddy puddle and it's flicked up a few bits. So that's another technique. But I'll go through these and then I'll bring you back for that. When I think about it, there is one area where it looks really effective on tanks, and that is in the background behind the wheels, because there it's going to stand proud for quite a while because it's caked in on there. So that's a good place to use this. You can see all the individual bits of muck on it then. As I say, if you were doing it having driven all through mud, you'd be caking it in the wheels and everything else, but that's just flicked up and dried on underneath. Right, back in a minute. Right, final mud is, as I say, the Vallejo Splash Mud. Not going to do very much of it, but just I'll show you the technique. What I do, anyway, is I get a little bit on the brush, get some of it off, and then I flick it, just flicking the brush so it actually speckles it on. A little bit more. just see flecks of splashed mud where it's perhaps gone through a puddle. I'll do a bit more on this side. Again, it's a choice thing. How much of this do you want to do? You know. Have a bit of that off. Well, you can get the splashes, and that's obviously, like I say, where it's gone through a like muddy puddle. Yeah, I don't really need to do a lot of that on these, but it's just so you can see it. Only little tiny spots. It's better, to be honest, the brush I'm using, because I've not got all my brushes out, it's not a very good one. You're better with a slightly stiffer brush, to be honest, a short brush, because then you get more of a flick. But that's the technique anyway. What I might look at, just to finish off with, is this mesh that I made up in the first video. It's not really the one that I'd like to use. I think I said when I first did it, because it's kind of a heavy weave. This is the very thin stretch bandage is the best stuff to use. But that said, I'm not going to put an awful lot on these, but I have seen some photographs where they've draped a little bit down the front. You know, it's not doing anything, it's not covering up all the detail, so I might do some little bits like that. And then another thing I've seen is, you know, a bit like the Firefly, where they've like used the white paint to kind of deflect the end of the turret to make it look like a short turret. I've also seen them wrapping bits of camo net around the actual gun. So I'm going to experiment with that. I'm probably not going to do it on everyone because they'd all start to look a bit samey then. But I might just have a little go at one or two of them. So I'll have a bit of a think, cut some little pieces out to use, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with it. Right, I'll be back in a second. Right, so with this net, what I've found works best is just cutting a very small piece. Take off any of the really exaggerated straggly bits, because otherwise it tends to kind of swamp the tank. And then I'll place it over the bit that I want, and then I'm using a little bit of my Geek Gaming fast drying basing glue, because I want this to stick well and not be coming off and fraying. And then gently dab that glue over the net. To hold it in place. So it looks like that, look. It's just a little bit that they've sprawled over the top of them boxes and the wheels. As I say, I'm not going to do this on everyone, but just so it looks a little bit different from the rest, I'll put a bit on there. Right, I'll carry on experimenting with this, and then I'll bring you back and show you some of the other little bits that I'm going to use it on. Right, so I've only added net to a couple of the tanks. I'll just show you what I've done. Put a little bit on the front of that one, and a little bit around the hatch. It's still wet at the minute, so it doesn't look quite right, but as that dries out, it'll go back to its colour, and then I can darken it with just a little bit more wash. But first of all, I want it to set securely in place because I don't want it straggling off. So that's that one. And the one that you've seen me doing, added a little bit to the front of that one. And then the final one I added the net to was just a little bit around the Cromwell's turret. Barrel. And again, that's still a bit wet, but when it dries out, I'll just touch that up with a bit of strong tone or soft tone. So we've got to let that dry now. So that's pretty much it. The final thing to show you is what I've been doing in between drying times with the 6-pounder gun. So what I'll do is I'll start by showing you a few photographs of it as I've gone along, because obviously I've done that as a bit of a filler so it's not on camera, and then I'll bring you the finished thing when we've seen the photos. So the first thing I did is stick the actual gun down, and then I used a few twigs to put, you know, like in front of it and a stone. And then introducing some more gravel and stones and a bit of grass. And then I've added, you know, some of the stowage that I used on the tanks and the vehicles. Still clear at the minute, but I'm going to have to paint that up. And then some of the earth scatter around it. And then started putting on my tufts and things around the edges and in front of the gun. Just something to build up a bit of a scene, but to keep the flat areas for where I'm going to add the troops, you know, so I didn't want anything to, you know, obstructing the back of the gun. I need place to place the men on it, so, but it's just building up the feature of it, really, try and make it, you know, marry up together and look the part. Right, so here it is, complete. So obviously I've painted up all the crates and the shells. What I've done is I've used a little bit of that net look and rolled it up into a bit of net that they've took off the crates and rolled it up and put it to the side. And I've used a few tufts and some little bits of dried wood to look like tree trunks. And that's my 6-pounder. And obviously I ain't going to put them on yet, but obviously there's plenty of room then to put the individual troops on there. I've made sure I've got enough flat areas to get them in where I need them. So that's it. So what I'm going to do now is give it a few more minutes for everything to dry, and then I'll do some photographs of everything that we've done and then wrap the video up. Right, back in a minute. that's the project completed, and that brings this fourth and final video to an end. I do hope that you've found some of this useful and that you can use some of the techniques on your own models. And thanks for sticking with me to the end. I know it's been a long video, but as I said, I tried to pack as much into it as I can. So if you have enjoyed it, please consider giving me a thumbs up or leave me a comment. I always read them and I do reply. Or possibly subscribe, and then if you click the bell, you'll get to know when any new videos drop. Anyway, thanks again for joining me and for sticking through to the end, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.